Good morning and welcome to another exciting edition of Day 4 with the man Frank Scalish.
We are live.
Actually, we're recorded today,
I know.
Frank.
I know, but I wanted
why
to
we're
say
recorded?
that. Yeah, because you're gonna be loaded to the cork.
Hopefully I am right now loaded to the cork. It is December 14th, 2023. And this is Day 4, but I am currently at Lake El Salto. You ever done the Mexico thing, Frank?
Yes, I have. And I will tell you, it is an absolute freak show.
Where'd you go?
Agua Milpa.
That's a lake in Mexico. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, that is a quiet little gem. I was unbelievably impressed with this place. And when I was there, you would catch dozens upon dozens upon dozens of 4 to 6 pounders.
Holy cow. See, this is why I don't do the sign. Keep going.
Dozens and dozens of 4 pounders. That was a long time ago. Now they're finally catching 8s, 9s, 10s. Agua Milpa is probably the best kept secret.
Really?
Yeah, it's
big baits or like typical stuff.
Pretty much anything you want. I'll you know what? We're talking about oddball stuff.
Yeah, today we're going to talk about oddball techniques that might load the boat.
Okay, so here's the story. I have a story.
Stories.
Yes,
I like
this is
stories.
a story.
It's a full screen story. Have at it.
So when I went to Agua Milpa, OSI, my title sponsor for when I fish Bassmasters, they had a trip that they gave away to a couple of winners of a contest that they put out, and that was the trip. It was to Lake Agua Milpa, and I had never been there before. I got a really super tight friend of mine. His name is Bruce. He's been there a million times. So Bruce and I got together and pretty much put this trip together. OSI took care of it, and we took the winners of their contest to this lake. And I had never been there before. So I packed 4 rods in a tube, grabbed a bunch of fat-free 7s, bunch of 10-inch worms. Literally, I only brought big giant baits because my only goal was to catch as many big bass as I can conceivably catch, and that was it. So the rule of the day was I had to take out the guests of OSI a half a day for each individual and fish with them, and then I stayed after an extra day or two with my buddy Bruce so we could just go whale on them. And so what happened was some of the guys that were on this trip were not dyed in the wool bass fishermen.
They weren't seasoned.
Right. So a lot of like cranking, like I was catching most of my big fish deep cranking with fat-free shads, DD22s. That's where all the big bass were coming from. But we caught, and when I say big bass, I mean, 5+. But you could catch 100 3 to 4 pounders just fishing, pitching soft plastics around. So anyhow, so I had got these guys out there, and you can't bring a million lures with you. You just can't. So I put, as many crankbaits as I could fit in a suitcase with as many 10-inch worms as I could fit in a suitcase. And that was my lure suitcase, basically. And so I was running out of 10-inch worms. And we were catching so many fish, the guys that I had taken out, and I had all these 10-inch worms with no tails laying in the bottom of the boat. So I'm like, we're just gonna wacky rig the straight part of the
body part of it.
So I just cut the broken tails off of them all and wacky rigged them for them, and they literally we plowed them nonstop. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. But the big ones, the real big ones, were coming all cranking, deep cranking. And so when all the OSI guys left, it was my buddy Bruce and his buddy Mike and me that stayed after to really do the deal. And so what happened was, yeah, and this lake, dude, is massive.
It's down there.
Yeah, it's massive, massive lake. If I wish I could bring my bass boat to it, because the stuff that we couldn't cover it. We fished literally a tenth of this body of water, and that's all we needed to do because it was so good fishing. So I don't know if I ever talked about the contest on this show. So my buddy Bruce is a competitive hombre, and we always make games out of pretty much every time we're in the boat together. It turns into a game. So the game of choice was you pick one lure. That's the only lure you can use.
Okay.
The only color of that lure you can use. Now, if you broke off, you were allowed to put a new one on, but it had to be the exact same bait, period. So you have to remember that we had been fishing this lake for 3 days prior to this. So got a pretty good idea what we need to do to catch the big ones. Okay. So I said this: nobody can throw the same bait. So if you pick a bait, it's out of the mix. You can't, nobody else can throw it. So we drew straws to see who gets to pick first. And I was last. So Bruce picked the 8-inch lizard, which I don't blame him. Solid pick. His buddy took a 1/2-ounce spinnerbait.
Solid pick.
It's a solid pick, but I'm not 100% sure why, because barely caught fish on a spinnerbait.
Okay.
And then I took a fat-free 7 in citrus because I knew that when I got one, it's probably going to be over 4 pounds. So here's the game. You stand up in the boat, guy on the front, guy in the middle, guy in the back. Anybody who catches one, anybody in the boat that catches one, you rotate positions, just like volleyball.
Mm-hmm.
You rotate positions, but here's the catch. You have to drink a beer. If somebody caught a 4-pounder or better, the other 2 guys had to drink a beer before they could start fishing again. You follow me?
Yeah. So
okay.
You got to keep fishing, but they had to drink a beer before they were back. So if you got on a roll and went fish, 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 they're 3 beers deep before they can even try to start catching up.
100%.
100%. This sounds dangerous. You could do this with Coca-Cola, 7-Up, water, milk, anything. It doesn't have to be beer.
It doesn't have to be, but it was dangerous beyond belief because the fish had to be over 4 pounds. Okay. So Gatto, our guide, comes down, and I said, Gatto cervezas. He comes down carrying a 12-pack. I go, no. Multi cervezas.
Mucho.
So he goes back up. He comes down and he's like this, and they're stacked over his head. So I'm like,
is this going to be the last day 4 ever, Frank?
No, because we didn't drive anywhere. Nobody was operating the boat.
Okay, we're good.
All we had to do is walk from the boat dock to the.
So you've got plenty of ammunition for the day.
Plenty. So
8-inch lizard, 1/2-ounce spinnerbait, Fat Free 7. I threw. Is this the plug right there?
That's the exact number one duplicate.
Okay. So that's what you've got on. That's your. Is that called a bell cow? That's the horse you're putting all the money on.
100%, dude. Like 100%.
And did you know, like, you felt pretty confident getting into the boat that morning that you would have two drunk compadres with you fairly soon?
I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if I wanted a beer, I would have to voluntarily drink one. And and it was such a thing of beauty because I think Bruce hooked up the first one. He hooked up the first one, and I don't remember if that was a drinkable beer or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember I made a cast out not too soon after that, and I go like this, and the guide Gatto goes, "Cervezas." Needless to say, the walk to the lodge is up a very steep hill, and to say that people were crawling to get up the hill would not be an understatement.
Did you just go on a tear? Was it every cast?
It was relentless. It was absolutely relentless. Bruce actually got a few over 4 on his lizard, which was good because I got to quench my parchness. And then poor Mike, I don't think he caught one over 4. And let's just say that the Fat Free Shad put the smack down on it. I mean,
so I need to bring a couple of those citrus Fat Frees with me to Old El Salto.
You absolutely need to. Not only
I
those,
like a shirt. I see a shirt, just cervezas with an exclamation point
and a Fat Free Shad in there.
Yep.
Yeah, you need to bring the Fat Free in citrus, and you need to bring the DD22 and tropical shad.
Hold on, let me pull that up. The DD22. I'm sure I have the citrus. I have the citrus, the Mark Davis signature edition citrus.
They wanted the Bill Dance citrus with the foil tape on it. And then
they didn't want the Mark Davis signature. They wanted the Bill Dance signature.
They wanted the Bill Dance. Apparently, they were more of a fan of Bill Dance.
Tennessee fans.
That's right.
In tropical shad?
Yeah, the DD22 and tropical shad.
Yeah, everyone has told me that that chartreuse and lime colors are the deal down in Mexico.
Yeah, then you may want to bring chartreuse and blue to the old standby.
Yep.
But I'm just gonna tell you, Matt, it was one of the funnest days I've ever had on the water. When I cast that crankbait out and that rod loaded up, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that somebody was popping a beer open and they couldn't make another cast until they were done. Now they didn't have to chug them. There was
but you're not fishing until it's done, and then if you start stacking them up, then you're in a real pickle.
Then you're in a jackpot. Then you're behind the 8 ball.
Didn't you say one time when we did a color show something about what chartreuse does at a certain depth underwater? Was that you saying it turns white?
Bright white
to the fish.
It's a vibrant bright white. Yeah.
I don't think a lot of people realize that.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's super cool.
Yeah. So was that a 4 or 5 day trip, and then it took them a whole day to recover? So did both of them lose a morning calling dinosaurs?
Oh, dude, I don't know. But yeah, it was interesting because we stopped at Tequila City on the way in and bought some tequila too.
They had a place called Tequila City.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Them blue agave plants are as far as you could see. You're on a mountaintop, and that's all you see is those blue plants as far as you could.
Did you fly into Mazatlan?
No, I flew into Mexico City.
Okay, I think we're flying into Mazatlan. And then,
yeah, but the lakes are not. You got to look at where the lakes are.
Yeah, we're flying into Mazatlan and then renting go-karts. they've got a van that comes picks us up.
Right.
That takes us to El Salto.
We got picked up by a van too. It was a lot of fun. The terrain on Agua Milpa is beautiful because part of the lake is a canyon reservoir.
Mhm.
So you've got these big mountain walls and sheer walls, and then the other part of it's like a desert, where it's not as steep. It's still steep, but it's not canyony. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It was really it's a beautiful place. It's absolutely a beautiful place.
Last week on day 4, the FX series of Rattling Smithwick Rogues dropped.
Oh,
and
yeah,
it was a cool show. Go back and watch that one. It's a big show. It kind of brings everything together for the last 2 years that you've preached about pearls. And this is kind of the culmination of your expertise with pearls and painting to come out with the 6 colors of the Rattling Rogue, which you kind of teased maybe or maybe not becoming in other lines down the road. There's a chance.
Yeah, it will be in some crankbaits for sure. So, yeah.
But
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just saying. You also mentioned, and we talked a little bit about the color.
Yeah, that's not
you kind of let a cat out of the bag there.
No, we can't. No, because that may not happen.
Okay, but so here's I'll level out what happened last week with this week, which depending, it's a little bit of a business trip headed down to Mexico. There, should things go as expected, hopefully next December, there may or may not be the possibility for a BTL trip. That's something you'd be interested?
Yeah, I better get my passport updated.
Yeah, no, 100%. I got my passport updated. But like I said, that's not, the ink is not dry on that yet, but that is the hope.
That would be wicked sick.
Could you imagine 15, 20 BTL listeners down there?
That would be
5 days, cervezas, workshops at night, chatting, drinking cold ones, catching 8 to 10 pounders, plowing them all day.
Ooh, that's
at a discounted BTL rate.
That's hard to say no to, man.
That'd be the dream, wouldn't it?
It'd be awesome.
So we're working on some stuff, Frank.
Perfect. I love it. So yeah, but there will be some FX colors coming out in crankbaits, which I'm excited about. Very excited about. This whole FX program is took a lot of research. I've been working on them for a long time. So I'm real happy about that. Oh, the other thing is last week's show, we talked about the pillows and the rogues, obviously.
Yep.
And you threw the BTL code up there, which that code ends the end of December. But if you want to get anything prior to Christmas, today, December 14th, the orders have to be in before noon, or there's a strong possibility you will not receive them in time for Christmas.
That's if you're ordering off of lurenet.com.
Correct.
And the code there is capital BTL 23. That goes through the end of the year. Check out the paint shop, the pillows, the FX series, all sorts of cool stuff going on at LureNet for the holiday season. They also have a bargain box that changes kind of on the daily basis too.
Correct. So oddball stuff, dude. What's the most oddball thing you've done?
Well, we were talking last week. We kind of got on this show because last week I was crappie fishing, and Zeke, who I was with, caught a 532 or 538 dipping a crappie jig. And he said it's the biggest bass he'd caught in about 20 years. And then I told him, well, this particular lake we were at, I busted a 20-pound bag out of there, crappie fishing, all largemouth. And by the second or third one, you're like, okay, that's a largemouth, but they're all 4-pounders, so you're not going to pass one up.
No.
And then when me and you went out to that lake.
Yeah, actually, what happened was you said you want to see what a 4-pounder looks like.
Uh-huh.
And so we ran it down, and you caught it, and it was, what was it, 4.7 or 4.8?
Yeah, it was a 4.5-pound largemouth.
Yeah.
So then me and you were talking, and we're like, well, that's a pattern. That's a viable pattern. I mean, we have a dozen bass over 4 pounds,
Oh,
getting
yeah.
caught on a 14-foot crappie rod and an 1/8-ounce crappie jig. If we'd gone out bass fishing any of those days with a
Right.
Rogue, with an Alabama rig, with a plug, we'd have been like, heck yeah, that's a successful day. But we're writing it off as just a oddball bass on a crappie lure.
Right.
Should we be, or should we be exploring that avenue, Frank?
I'm all 100% into exploring that avenue. And
Because that happened to you last week on the water as well.
Absolutely. And so here's my, can I go into my thought process?
Yes, that is what the show is based on. It is based on your thought process.
There's going to be a lot of viewers that are probably too young to know about the float and fly technique, which was developed in Kentucky, Tennessee area, that chain of lakes down there, where you have a 9-foot rod, spinning rod, and you set your, basically it's a, for lack of better words, it's like a crappie jig. It's just a pseudo marabou jig 10 feet underneath a bobber, and you hurl the thing out there. This was way before forward facing sonar, way before side imaging, way before all that. You go to bluffs, short, steep points, transition areas in the wintertime. You lob this thing out there and you watch your float and you pull it a little bit. Your float moves, you stop it. Your bait pendulum's under the float. The float stands upright when it's back to vertical. So when you pull your float's on an angle. The crappie jigs or the float and flies down here. As the float and fly pendulum's down, your bobber goes back up and the float and flies underneath the bobber. Yes, there it is. That's the rig. Okay. So I think that we could scope them with the 14-foot rods exactly like we do the float and fly. So I'm working it out now where next winter I can get down south and I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna experiment with this and do nothing but scope with the 14-foot rod and the way we crappie fish for these smallmouth and spotted bass.
Do you think you can get close enough to them?
I do.
Without spooking them?
Absolutely do.
Winter technique.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm taking it a step further. And I'm looking at these rods we're using, and they're meat sticks.
Mm-hmm.
Why not make them even meatier? Put 40 and 50 pound test braid on, then create a bucktail crappie imitation jig with a plastic on the back and vertically drop into all these piles all summer that you can't get through with a typical tactic that the giant bass are eating 4 and 5 inch crappie out of. And now you're dipping the piles using your forward facing sonar to put it directly in their face in the piles and then dragging them out.
Why wouldn't it work? I mean, here,
that's what I'm saying.
All you're doing is punching only with 15 or 20 feet of water above you.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would work, actually. I think you could go farther than that, and I think you could Texas rig a heavy slip sinker on a Texas rig and do it. I think that's cool. I'm excited to try it out. Just because that's what I do, man.
So this is kind of coming full circle here, because a little bit of bass history here, Frank, and you're well aware of this. There used to be I believe it was an 8-foot rod limit,
right?
For bass fishing. Now that was a result of an overly effective technique that was developed, I think, out on the West Coast, where the guys would get 12 and 14-foot poles and would dip them in between all the rock. They tie a buzzbait to it, do like figure eights, whoosh, fish would come out, and it was too effective.
Mm-hmm.
So they banned the rod length. And then you had D. Thomas with flipping and things like that kind of came after that.
Correct.
But then as offshore techniques and as rod companies wanted to develop more and more, I remember I want to say it was around 2010 and 2012 that bass went, I think, to a 10-foot rod length, or maybe even eliminated it. But I know
it was 9. It was 9 foot.
9, and then MLF, which was FLW at the time, eliminated the rod length. You can have a rod of any length that you can use or could use at FLW, and I believe still at MLF, because I vividly remember watching a co-angler throw a fly rod at Beaver Lake. Which would you have come unglued if you're fishing an FLW tour event and there's a guy behind you going whoosh, shoo, whoosh,
No,
shoo?
actually, it would tickle me to death because I would know that he will catch a few, but he won't catch all of mine.
Yeah.
And so I would be really happy.
So rod length wise, if you're a non-tournament guy, hell, go out there with a 30-foot European carp pole,
match fishing rod. Yeah,
the match fishing rod. But bass fishing, I don't think the surface has even been scratched on this, and we're seeing glimpses of it in the crappie world.
Yeah, the bass fishing haven't. It's not. We're going to make it happen. We're going to make it happen because I see a completely viable way to do this, and I agree with you. Dunking in deep brush, it's going to be wrong.
And you can provide a bait completely vertically in the fish's face and move it around like you can't with the cast and retrieve.
Right, because now basically you're just flipping. You're flipping, and you can go bring it down into each nook and cranny of that tree or of that timber. I mean, do you remember in the heyday of Amistad when guys would flip them big Magnum tubes?
I was just getting into it when that happened.
They would flip the big Magnum tubes into the trees, and they would feather the line out and let that tube fall through the trees. Think about how many friction locks they get on a hook set as that tube goes around branch to branch to get down there. They might be around 3 branches. Then when the bass bites it and they set the hook, that line is around all those branches. So they get friction lock, and they may not get a good hook into fish. More often than not, you lose the bass or you break off. So now if you have, with your forward facing sonar, you can see the branches. You could literally dunk down in between the branches, just like we did when we crappie fished the standing timber. And you could do that bass fishing, but the rods have to be made.
And I don't know why you couldn't do that on Toledo Bend or Sam Rayburn, even if you don't have forward facing sonar. Get off the channel ledge there, and instead of flipping it and then having the thing pendulum back, you can literally just
go down and dunk.
And then hold it and raise it up, have it vertical. I mean, you make that thing look so much more lifelike than something where you're casting and you're having to move it horizontally while at the same time vertically moving it.
Right. I agree 100% with that. The rods would have to be radically different than the crappie rods.
Yes, radically, because it's
different.
It's a rodeo when you hook anything over 4 on a 14 to 16 foot rod.
It is. It really is, because you have no control. You have a limited amount of control. I shouldn't say no control. You have a limited amount. The rods would have to be
telescoping,
and
because you have to keep it on the reel.
Right, you have to keep it.
You could have it where you could go like that, then shoot it down and go from 16 to 9.
Yeah, but the guides would get in the way. You can only bring it back to the stripper guide. You follow me?
A stripper guide last time I was in Las Vegas.
Unless you put the line.
No, I see what you're saying.
Unless you put the line through the entire blank and had no
Which
guides.
has been done before, but then that's a nightmare if you lose it, because you have to tie it to a pin and shoot the
right.
Yeah, there's some. So this also leads to the bait selection, because Zeke caught this fish on an 1/8 ounce jig. You're catching these fish on little bitty things. So then also it opens the door to, hey, are micro lures effective for giant bass if you get it into the right strike zone? Well, that we're not understanding here, especially in the cold water months.
Okay, so let's talk about micro. Let's talk about the Norman Deep Tiny End, which is a little tiny bait this big that Rick Clun actually put on the map for bass fishing. Let's talk about an inline spinner like a rooster tail, little tiny, spinner. Um, there's a lot of little tiny baits. Look at the Ned rig, the Ned rig with the turd, not the way I fish it with the
Yep.
5-inch dinger. Um, the C77 Big O. So now all of a sudden we do have micro baits for bass, but it's always the cast and retrieve kind. It's not you know what I'm saying? Back in the old days, dude, we had a bait called a super dew, which was a solid bodied soft plastic bait with about 12 tentacles on it, like an octopus. And we would rig it on a 16th ounce slip sinker and flip that bait. And it was tiny.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, it was tiny. So there definitely is a time and a place for micro baits for bass without a shadow of a doubt. You look at the finesse spinner baits of today. They're designed to mimic smaller profile shad. So they're going in the right direction, but it's still a cast and a retrieve. It's not the plunk and dunk. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
I like that.
I think there's a viable. We haven't discovered it yet, but we're going to.
And I don't think you need forward-facing sonar if you know where they're standing timber. If you know where your favorite brush pile is, you can just daub around.
Yeah, because 2D sonar. I mean, that's how I grew up fishing 2D sonar, and I would idle around till I found a brush pile, and then I'd get my CC spoon or my Hopkins spoon out. I'd get right on top of the deep brush pile, and I would jig the spoon up, and I'd call them up from the tree to get the spoon. And I was right on top of that brush pile with my 2D sonar, and I saw the fish on 2D come up and get the spoon. Because you see, it's not a straight line, it's a diagonal line because your screen's moving. So the line is diagonal. But you watched it all happen.
Now answer me this, and I've thought about this out on Thousand Islands, specifically Ontario. Why can't you do this on smallmouth out there? Can you not get close enough to them, or is there just not as much benefit to it? Or, I mean, you get those Great Lakes smallmouth that are in the rock piles. Why can't you drop something down 15 feet out in front of them and hop it right in front of their face over and over again until they bite, or do it when they're on the beds?
Well, you absolutely can. I mean, you 100% can. I mean, in the beginning stages of drop shotting, 99.9% of the time I drop shotted, I was straight underneath my trolling motor. And I can see the fish that I was fishing for. And they would be anywhere between 14 and 30 some feet, depending on how deep they were. But I can get right on top of them. They didn't spook away. They stayed there. I had the one tournament that I came back from 86th place to finish fourth in. I drop shotted every one of those bass off of my locator, straight down off the boat. I'd find the boulder, I'd see the bass, I'd drop down on them, I stop it just like we do crappie fishing, stop it right above them, shake it a couple times, they'd swim up for it, and boom, and I'd get them. So it's absolutely viable.
I'm interested because we're literally, I think, just kind of spitballing here on different things. But yeah, drop shot with a true vertical presentation. You don't realize when you cast that thing how much you're, dragging it at an angle.
Oh, 100%. That's why sometimes I used to make my leaders, the windier it was, the longer I made my leader.
Oh, that's smart.
Because you couldn't get vertical on them. So I'd have to cast out. So I said, well, if they're 3 feet off the bottom, 4 feet off the bottom, I need a 6-foot leader to my weight. So
holy cow, a 6 foot. So
yes,
you drag with a 6-foot leader.
Yeah, because at the angle I'm at, then the bait would be 3 feet off the bottom doing its thing. So my leader length would be enormous to 20 inches, depending on how much wind I had and how vertical I could. If you get vertical on them, it's not necessary to have a giant
Right.
leader because you're doing it all by sight. But if you can't be vertical on them and you can't see them, you've got to have that bait off the bottom to wherever they're suspending at. So I think that there's techniques that are untapped, untouched, and uninvented yet.
The one that you've touched on over the past couple years, a couple times you've talked about it, I believe, but haven't really gone in depth, is slow reeling a Carolina rig.
Oh yeah, dude.
Yeah, are you willing to talk about that? Because that's one that we haven't really talked about, but to me is an oddball technique.
It's an oddball technique. I got on it real hardcore smallmouth fishing. And I was actually on Champlain. What was happening is I would be dragging the Carolina rig. So the Carolina rig, typically you drag it, you stop it, you pick up your slack, you drag it, you stop it, you pick up your slack. As I was dragging it, I would feel dunk, 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 dunk. And you'd go, oh, those are perch. Those are perch. Well, I kept moving the thing and I kept getting those dunk, dunk, dunks. And so I sped it up a little bit and my rod would load up and it was a 4-pound smallmouth. And so I was like, holy crap, this is viable. So I started experimenting with it. When I got home, there's a couple inland lakes that are notorious for smallmouth. If you don't keep it moving, you don't catch them. You get the little bump, 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 and then the minute you pause it, they lose interest in the bait. And so I would keep it moving. So then I would cast it out, let it hit the bottom, and I would just slowly reel it in, having it almost like a wobblehead, but not probably as aggressive, a little less aggressive than the wobblehead. And it works. And I absolutely massacre them doing that.
That's something that I would almost be willing to try that. Because it is a mixture between the C rig, obviously a weightless offering, wobblehead, and a crankbait.
Right. And here's the cool thing. You have to see it in action to believe it.
Now, are you going a shorter leader on this or a longer leader when you plan on moving the bait across the bottom without the typical drag pause?
Yeah, generally I'm 18 to 22 inches on my leader.
So you're not that far. You're not doing the 6-foot leader. You want the weight to be creating a disturbance or sound on the bottom, and that bait to be close enough to when that fish comes to investigate, boom, it sees that bait trailing.
Right, or appealing to the predatory nature of game fish. The sinker's kicking up dust, making noise, and you got this bait right behind it following the dust cloud. You follow me? So it's like they think something's tracking whatever's on the bottom.
Front runner, but on the bottom.
Right. I mean, here, think about how many. Well, I don't know if you Carolina rigged enough, but
nope.
How many sinker bites you get on the Carolina rig?
I've heard about it.
I get tons of them. Boom. And that's the clue. I got to speed it up. I got to speed up the thing. Because if they're hitting the sinker, they're paying more attention to the disturbance than the bait. So now I got to keep it moving. So when they go to investigate the noise, the dust cloud, they get close enough, see that bait back there doing its thing, and they get the bait.
Another oddball, to me, now this might be a little bit more normal, is bottom fishing a blade bait. And I know that there are guys who do this, but it goes against, you think of, and you could even do this with an XR50 or 75, but a bottom blade bait where I've seen a couple guys, you drag it like a jig. That is an oddball technique, Frank.
That is absolutely money.
You haven't talked about this one on the show, I don't think.
I never brought this one up.
Sorry.
That is.
Are you going to be upset at me afterwards?
No, I don't. No, I don't care. Okay. That is a #1 smallmouth technique with a blade bait.
Can you go into it? Because I don't understand why a chunk of metal that's when you reel it, it goes, brrr, it makes total sense. But I've done this one time before, when you drag it, it feels like a football jig.
Well, here's the deal. Okay, so you brought up the XR50 on Kentucky Lake one time. We were fishing an ABA championship, me and a buddy of mine, and we were literally dragging the XR50 on the bottom. You move it just enough where you could feel it go toot 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 and catching them, which is almost exactly the way I fish a blade bait on Lake Erie. I cast it out, I let it hit the bottom, and then I sweep the rod. Bump, 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 bump. Pick up my slack, bump, 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 and they crush it. They absolutely crush it. Now there are times when you want to yo-yo the thing, depending on what you're fishing, how the terrain of the structure you're fishing is. Okay, but that drag technique is it's disgusting.
With
It's
like the gay blade, the cotton cordell gay blade, or
yeah, and the head and sonar.
okay, so there's
It's
the gay blade there,
right.
and then the sonar, and there's the head and sonar right there. The head and sonar is probably the number one lure to do that with, right?
Yeah, 100%. That so you got three holes on the bait. You see the three holes?
Yep.
Okay, so if I'm dragging it, that's where it's at on the
The
first
front
hole.
position of the hole, the closest to the head of the lure.
Correct. If I'm vertical, I'm in the center hole.
Okay.
I don't hardly ever use the back hole. The back one will vibrate the bait very erratically.
Okay.
It's very erratic. What I found out on there's three positions. The last position, it has a tendency to flip the tail around into your line,
Oh,
and
that's so annoying.
you hang up the back hook on your line a lot. So I seldomly use that. I'm always into the first two, and the first position is my cast and retrieve or my drag. The center hole is for vertical presentation. Now, I did that color. I designed that color. Go back. Yeah, I designed that color. Go to the next one. I designed that color. Go to the blue one in the front.
Pink.
I designed that color too. And go to the 1, 2, 3, fourth one in. Yeah, right there. Nope, next one. Next
I
one.
was gonna say that one's pretty standard.
No, I didn't do that color.
The silver. If you're gonna buy two colors, buy gold and buy silver, right?
100%. Here's what I found. A lot of my buddies throw gold blade baits on the lake. A lot of them do. I found that silver spoons and silver blade baits work better for me. And the same thing with my spoons. There is, go to the Fire Tiger. That's the next best color right there. That color right there. No. And then go to the third one from the last. That's my favorite.
That is pretty sexy. That is like a scale silver with a chartreuse head.
Right. That's my favorite right there.
So along those lines, piggybacking off of it, typically a bait that you would think you're going to move to get vibration. You mentioned the spoon. One of the things, the oddball techniques that I have had a lot of success with is using the Cordell spoon, a 3/4 or a 1/2 ounce slab spoon, and then cranking it as fast as I can in the top of the water column to simulate a small fleeing shad.
Yeah, which is a really good summertime technique.
Which instead of what you expect to do with that is you drop it down, you pump it, they hit it on the slack, but I'll spool a reel with that thing and then keep it up 3 foot down from the surface, cranking and pumping the rod tip and get some ferocious strikes on that, specifically on schooling bass in the hottest part of the year.
Yeah, that's a great technique, and a confession, one that I don't do a lot. I wish I did it more, because when they come up schooling,
yep,
and you fire a top water out at them and you get a couple that smoke it and then they don't take it, or you throw a jerk bait out at them and you rip the jerk bait back to the boat. That spoon technique could be the deal breaker.
It is the deal breaker at times. On Hartwell, on the blueback herring lakes,
Oh, yeah.
specifically on power plant lakes where you have a lot of smaller shad at odd times of the year because of the jacked up water temperature in there. I have a box just of slab spoons that I'll throw on 17-pound test or 16-pound test, and I can spool a bait caster. I'll put it on a high gear ratio, a 7-to-1 on a 7.6 rod, and you can literally your schooling fish getting a bait in their strike zone doubles.
Well, and you're
boat.
Yeah, and you're making it look exactly like what they're chasing.
Little bitty shad like that.
Right. Exactly like what they're chasing. Like I did that on Lay Lake, but I was throwing bucktails at them.
Mm-hmm.
They'd come up, you'd see 2 or 3 come up, fire the bucktail out there, and just keep hopping it back.
Okay, so that's a unique technique because that's typically a striper lure or a tail race lure.
Yeah,
the way you're fishing it, or an offshore summer lure, big
Right.
giant feather chicken, looks like you've got a freaking Cornish hen on your lure.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
You're talking about a streamlined bucktail.
Yeah, it's streamlined bucktail, and back then, what I used a gulp minnow as a trailer on it.
Okay.
So the bucktail would go over the gulp minnow, and I would have the scent from the gulp on it. And that's what I used on Lay Lake. And then of course I had smaller bucktails, little quarter ouncers that I made. Now today, with all the soft plastics, like the forward facing minnow, the forward facing sonar minnow, that would be a ridiculous trailer on that. They would be ridiculous. So, so there's things. Now, the funny thing is that bucktail, the bucktail thing, originally the preacher jig was the first structure fishing tool. So when they first came out with the preacher jig, I tied a bunch of them. And I went to some of the local lakes here. And when I was catching them Carolina rigging or deep cranking, I would throw the preacher jig after I was done cranking and Carolina rigging, and I would always pick up 1 or 2 extras. And over the course of time, I kind of got away from it. When I started competing in Bassmasters, I kind of got away from that cleanup bait because I used it mostly as a cleanup. You know what I mean? I never used it as my main thing because my confidence was in the big crankbaits and the Carolina rig. And of course the football jig, but those were my confidence baits. So I said, I'm not going to waste time. I can catch more faster traditionally, but you're leaving fish on the table. You know what I mean? And I never looked at it as though I was leaving fish on the table. I looked at it like, well, this is the way I'm fishing the most efficiently. But how many did I pass up over the course of time? And as well as I know, in the cast for cash game, 1 bass makes a big difference. So,
A couple more things that I want to run by you that you've mentioned in past shows, but we've been doing other shows and then we haven't expounded on it, and they're oddball techniques. One of them that I know that is lethally effective is fishing a floating rogue like a topwater, a jerk bait like a topwater. You've mentioned that a couple of times.
Yeah.
Have not really gone into that, but that is an oddball technique. Typically a cast and retrieve, a troll, a twitch, but that rogue is lethal on fish to get explosive topwater strikes.
Yeah, I do that with the floating rogue, and you guys are going to kill me. It's not the floating rogue with the regular rogue bill. It's the floating rogue with the smaller bill. And I don't know the numbers of it.
Is it still
for
sale?
Yeah, oh yeah. So if you go to the rogue page, I'll spot it in a second. Go to the floating rogues. I'll tell you which one it is, and I'll tell you my favorite color too.
Okay. There's the perfect 10, the pro. There's the rattling 0 to 4.
It's got to be the floating
rogue.
Click on that one. Let me see the bill. That looks like the right bill. Yeah, that's the bill. Okay, so my favorite color in that is the brim color. That It's the
That
brim.
is the brim color.
Yeah. Okay. So that looks a little. You don't see all the metallic in that bait, and the picture makes it look way more goldy than it is, but it's more brimmy looking, bluegilly looking. That is my absolute 100%. I got 6 of those in my rogue box, especially during the pre-spawn and the spawn. That is deadly. And all I'll do is I'll cast it out and I'll twitch it down. It'll literally be an inch underneath the surface, and you stop it and the tail comes up. And then I pull it again and the tail slaps on the water. And I'm keeping it literally 4 or 5 inches from the surface to the surface. And that's how I fish that bait. And if there's grass and the grass isn't on top, you guys hold on, because that's when it's really effective. And that's one of my favorites. The other thing I do is, which is no secret, the jointed redfin. I'll wake a jointed redfin. I do it a lot. I do a couple tricks to the bill to make them wake better. But I'll do the jointed redfin. I've caught so many 4-pound spots on table rock doing that. It's sickening. It's absolutely sickening. So that's another thing that I do, but I don't think that's off the beaten path, because that was made famous a long, long time ago.
Yep, that's what you're talking about right there.
Mm-hmm. I did that color too, by the way.
Yeah, that looks good. All right, one more, and you mentioned at the very beginning. We talked a little bit about it, but have never kind of done a little bit of a deep dive, which I've found this show to be very interesting. I'm rolling through all these different oddball things.
I just can't believe you remember what I talk about on all these shows, dude.
It's a gift and a curse.
You're like the rain. You're like the Rain Man.
You have, in passing, mentioned rooster tails and inline spinners. You mentioned at the beginning of this show. Definitely an oddball technique for hardcore tournament anglers. Probably one of the most often used fun fishing lures, though. Like, I mean, I have a box of the things, and if I'm around trout, fun fishing, stopping, any of that stuff, I got no problem throwing it. Have never made a cast in a tournament with it. I know it's in Ike and Ellie's panic box. I know it's something that you use a lot.
Yeah. So the rooster tail and the Meps are probably the most underrated real bass fishing lures on the market today. Every pond hopper knows them like the back of their hand, because when I pond hopped, I had I had a box of rooster tails. Literally, it was a little six chambered container that would fit in my back pocket. I'd put 3 of them things in each slot. And it's dude, I was on freaking
Norman?
no,
Play?
TVA, Pickwick.
Pickwick.
I was on Pickwick, and I was catching them really good, cranking a Bandit 200, and of course root beer, of course, a root beer Bandit 200, and I was fishing these shallow gravel shoals, and I had some in the creek mouths and some on the main lake. So obviously it wasn't summertime; it was more in the spring era. Before, it was like almost like post spawn. The fish were not out on summer stuff yet, but they weren't spawning. And so I had gone to this one main lake flat that I was fishing, and I forget the other pro that I was fishing with, because back then a pro and a pro could could pair out together. I forget, and he's gonna kill me too, because we used to
still fish.
I don't know if he fishes anymore, but we used to be pretty close. But at any rate, I pull up on this thing, and I'm burning the Bandit back to the boat, and I'm not catching them, and I can see fish boiling. So I dive into my box. I pulled out the rooster tail, and I fire that rooster tail out there, and I don't get 3 pumps of the reel turn off, and I got one. And we sat there and caught him on inlines.
That's awesome.
Yeah, during a Bassmaster event.
Why do you think even though, rooster tail comes, you can throw a half-ounce rooster tail, you can get it out there. It's an easy to use bait. Why do you think inlines have such a rookie status amongst the hardcore tournament anglers? Why do you think not utilized?
I could tell you why. Because every one of us grew up pond fishing with them. And so it has that stigma behind it. Oh, that's not a real bass bait. That's a pond bait. But I'll tell you what, I would take the hook off of it, put a split ring on it, put my own hook on it, a single hook, and then I could use a plastic trailer with it, or I can just leave the single hook bare. And so I was able to make it 100% weedless, where I could fish it right in the weed beds, or I could use the single hook where, if you hook one on, like I would use a spinnerbait trailer hook on it, is what I would do.
Well, that's smart.
And then you hook up with it and they ain't going anywhere but in the boat, period. Those were the modifications that I would do to those things.
So right in here, because it just has this, you have to cut this hook off.
Yeah, I would
take a pair of dikes, cut the hook off, add a split ring, and then add your hook to the split ring.
Right, and I would use spinnerbait trailer hooks because I like the O'Shaughnessy style hook, and it's a bigger gap, and you really them fish get impaled. It's like a gaff.
Little secret show today, Frank.
Yeah, see, I made my own inlines for a while.
Really?
Yeah, where I would tie round rubber on them. I tied the chicken feathers on them, squirrel tails, rabbit strips, all kinds of stuff. I had them. I carried them with me all the time. And the funny thing is, you get away from it,
Yeah, you got juice on that exotic fur now, Frank. I was out with him the other day, and he's like, "Well, that's a Scandinavian goose," and we're like, "What?"
Is he doing any?
He's like, "This is an endangered polar bear hair jig," and we're like, "Yeah." He's like, "Frank loves this stuff," and I'm like, "Really? You don't say?"
Is he doing any Arctic fox?
Oh yeah, he's all into the Arctic fox. He's into the Canadian mongoose. He's into all sorts of the great. He's got.
Tell him he's got to start looking at Australian possum.
Australian possum. Okay.
Yeah, I tie a lot of steelhead flies with that Australian possum, and you got to be careful where you get it from because you want the longest,
hairiest possum fur possible.
Yeah, you want the longest.
He's into the duckbill platypus stuff now. Very hard to get on the black market.
Spotted owl feathers.
Spotted owl down. Yep. Oh my gosh. Anything else you got before we wrap this one up? That was I think that'll have people searching the dark corners of lurenet.com for some offerings that are still out there that are often overlooked, Frank.
Yeah, the inline spinner to me is probably something that should be in your arsenal, at least in your boat all the time. And I'll be flat out honest with you. When I fished Bassmasters, I had a box of them, a little box with about a dozen and a half of them in it at all times because it saved my neck a bunch of times. The other thing that people don't think about is the beetle spin. That's another lure that could save your butt in a pinch. But now Bomber's got the drum beater, so I just use the drum beater now.
Yeah, we did a whole show on that.
Yeah.
The inlines, I think number one, the rooster tail is leading that, but the three that I always had are that I have a box. I just need to put it in the boat because I do a lot of trout and a lot of fun fishing. Rooster tail, Meps, and then if I was in heavy current, I would always throw the Panther Martin.
The Panther Martin was deadly.
Yeah.
Dude, it was deadly, man.
They had a Panther Martin deep that would stay deep while you crank it, but for some reason, like you get a little Panther Martin, if you're a rainbow trout, you are so screwed.
Well, that little Panther Martin, because it's got a woolly bugger as a trailer on it. It's a little woolly bugger trailer.
Yeah.
That Panther Martin, I used to wreck the trout on them here. And you know what else I used to do? I used to take a little tiny piece of like a 1-inch piece of Nightcrawler and put it on the back of that.
Oh, that's just not even legal.
It's unfair. It's
but
like
size wise for the rooster tail, if you guys are wanting to try it, obviously match the hatch, which we've done shows on match the hatch about, but day in and day out, a 1/2 ounce rooster tail cast far. You could throw it on decent tackle, but it still has a very small profile.
Yeah, and see, I'm more partial to the 1/4 ounce rooster tail, which there it shows our differences. But if I'm throwing a Meps, I'm going to throw an Alga 3 probably.
Okay.
Which it's still not quite the 1/2, but I had the 1/2 ounce rooster tails in my boat too, because if it's windy out, you got to honk them. And the key to that, guys, you got to throw it on a bait caster, and you better have a crane swivel there, because it'll twist your line like.
See, I throw it on a spinning rod, but I throw it a high quality, the ball bearing snap, the 2-in-1, where you've got the ball bearing that then has the snap on the end. So I mean, there's a little bit of hardware hanging off, but that's the only way to. And I throw it on braid to reduce the line twist.
That's
like
not
10-pound braid.
Yeah, so the ball bearing swivel is nice, and now they have them where there's no split rings on them. They're welded shut ball bearing swivels. I think Sampo makes them. Those are money, because you're tying your if you're going to make a leader, you're tying the leader to something smooth and round and doesn't have the pinch part to it. Or you can just do what we do on the Super Spook Juniors, put a split ring and a crane swivel in front of the spinnerbait itself, the inline spinner itself.
We're gonna have to figure out what we're gonna do next week, because I'll be on the sunny Southern California beaches on the 21st, Frank.
Man, you are a man of the world, Matt. You're a man of the world.
You got to do what you got to do.
Well, you keep doing what you got to keep doing. I'll keep doing what I have to keep doing. And somewhere in the middle, we got to go catch some giant crappies, bro.
There's going to be like a 2 or 3 day window in January, because then, my open season starts.
Yeah.
The 1st of February down on the Big O, Lake Okeechobee. You got anything on your Christmas wish list? When was the last time that you could remember you really were hoping someone got you something specific for Christmas?
I don't ever ask for anything or hope for anything for Christmas, but I could tell you what I didn't want for Christmas. That stupid talking largemouth. That singing bass.
Billy Bass?
Yeah.
Meet me at the river.
I was
toss me in the water. That one?
I was 100% positive I was going to get 2,000 of those for Christmas.
How many did you end up getting?
None, because everybody who ever talked to me, I said, don't even think. Oh, I got one. I said, don't even think about buying that for me.
Well, if anybody wants to peruse eBay, and you can send them to me, and then I'll direct send them to Frank, and we could Billy Bass bomb them for this Christmas.
No, I'm telling you right now.
You got a new cat for Christmas. We saw her last week.
Yeah, that's because that's a perfect case in point where your children will stop listening to you at some point.
It's a gift that keeps on giving. A new kitten.
Yeah, I said no more cats. Bam is the last cat, and here I got another one that I got to deal with.
Bam is not the last cat. Very cute kitten, though. I mean, if you're gonna get one, you might as well have one with a little bit of personality that's kind of cute.
Well, I agreed. Kind of like a girlfriend.
I wasn't gonna say that, Frank. All right, this has been another edition of Day 4 with the man Frank Scalish. We'll talk to everyone later. See ya.
Adios.